All right. So this first one is the opinion from Ken Paxton, who's the Attorney General of Texas. This is opinion number KP0401. It states whether certain medical procedures performed on children constitute child abuse. And so basically, in a nutshell, this talks about certain sterilization procedures, referring to puberty blockers, also referring to genital surgeries that they refer to as sex change procedures. And he talks about what he believes they are medically, and then also talks about the physiological and psychological implications of these changes, and then also about parents who choose to help their children get these certain procedures. And he makes some very bold arguments in favor of these being labeled as child abuse. And I know I have a lot of thoughts about this. I know Phoebe has a lot of thoughts about this as well. I don't know if you want me to go straight into that, because I have a lot to say about it.
Well, I would just like to say that making bold claims doesn't necessarily mean they're accurate claims. Even like as a layperson, I had to look up a lot of words in this article. I'm not ashamed to admit it, but I'm curious for I'm curious to hear more from you, Ben. I'm also curious to hear more from Phoebe, so I'm going to kind of let the two of you riff for a little bit. But folks, before I turn it over to the actual two trans people on the panel who know way more about this than I do, I just want to say, if you get a chance to read this, it is a bit dry. There's a lot of $5 words, and I just kept thinking, like, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. Because this seemed to me, even as a layperson, that this was just like a sneaky attempt to fool people that are not in the medical field into seeing these high-minded words, a lot of footnotes, a lot of references, but really in the end, it's just telling bigots what they think they already knew.
It's flim flam and codswallop.
Yeah,
I like it.
What this ends up being is, this is somebody who we know is very persuasive. And if there's one thing attorneys do well, it's being persuasive, and not necessarily in being correct, but they can make you think that they're correct. And what he's doing here, he's taking the medical language, using just enough knowledge to be dangerous here, and using words incorrectly, using improper definitions, and he is drawing conclusions from a lack of information. And I think the biggest thing here that he's doing wrong is that medicine is very nuanced. There's a lot of context, and you learn this from studying medicine and from getting experience in the field. But when you put something like this into such black and white categories of, is this abuse or is this not, without understanding the nuance of these procedures, you really don't have a leg to stand on when talking about these problems. And so I think kind of the big thing I wanted to address here is, in the beginning, he talks about the following sex change procedures are including sterilization through castration, vasectomy, hysterectomy, oophorectomy, metoidioplasty, orchiectomy, pinectomy, phalloplasty, vaginoplasty, mastectomies, and removing from children otherwise healthy or non-diseased body part or tissue. And he's doing some very intentional things here with the language. But within the medical standards of care for trans kids, we do not do genital surgeries on children unless there is a medical indication for it. So if someone has a condition like hypospadias, where the urethra is positioned improperly, that could cause medical harm. It could be lethal in some cases with infection. So that's a case where you would have to operate on a child. But we do not do sex change procedures on children. So that's just false. We do them on consenting adults. And I think in some cases you can do it on older teenagers who have the ability to give consent. And then in talking about puberty blockers, they do not cause any permanent damage. They're a temporary scenario. So it's a GnRH agonist, which means that you increase the amount of GnRH which is going to stimulate production of estrogen or testosterone. And that stimulation is going to cause so much hormone to be produced that it's going to feed back and cause it to shut down. And this isn't a permanent mechanism. You have to continually stimulate it in order for it to shut down. And these are only used for about 2 years at a time maximum, because the goal is not to keep somebody from not going through puberty. The goal is to give the person enough time to decide if they want to undergo hormone replacement therapy or not. So that's the time for them to talk to their doctor, talk to their therapist, talk to their parents to see if that is something they want to do. If they do want to go through with hormones, they can do that. And then you stop the puberty blockers. They don't get the side effects. Puberty resumes for their chosen puberty they want to go through, or they are taken off of the puberty blocker and their normal puberty happens. The one that they would have had continues to happen. So it's not that you're stopping the puberty, you're just delaying it. And so I think even the puberty blocker thing is a bit of a misnomer. It should be a puberty pauser, not necessarily a blocker. So I think the lack of nuance.
It's like a tape player. You've pressed pause, you haven't hit eject.
Yeah. You're just giving them a little bit of time, because the things that are irreversible are hormone replacement therapy to an extent. Some of those effects are reversible, some are not. And then the most irreversible part is your own endogenous puberty. So delaying that isn't going to cause any more side effects than your own endogenous puberty.
Endogenous meaning?
Meaning the one that your body is going to just organically go through.
Okay, perfect. I thought that's what you meant, but I just want to make it clear for the rest of the audience that is dumb like me and isn't up to speed.
I'm looking over my head as well. I'm
yeah, exactly. Phoebe, what did you have to add?
So there's a lot of problems that I have with the opinion that has been rendered itself. It leans very heavily on the Texas Code, and it leans very heavily on what abuse is. And abuse is very woolly in its definition, and this is included in the opinion, and I should just read it. It says, mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable material impairment in the child's growth, development, or psychological functioning. Now, that's a very broad-based thing, and very, very wide, because I, as somebody who does have some form of legal training, could very easily argue that preventing somebody from accessing these treatments quite clearly falls into an observable psychological functioning issue when it comes to certain levels of mental harm that can be caused if you deny a loving family the ability to support their children through what is a very difficult part of a child's upbringing, and to allow that child to be able to freely express themselves to those who are in their life, teachers, parents, doctors, etc. So for Ken Paxton to write this opinion, which is just an opinion, it's a persuasive opinion, but it's just an opinion. It's not legislation, it's not a court ruling, it's just an opinion written by the Attorney General. And that needs to be taken into account here, that this hasn't been tested in court, this opinion. This hasn't gone through the Texas House or the Texas Senate. It hasn't been signed by Greg Abbott into law. This is just Ken Paxton writing an opinion based on the answer to a series of questions that he received from a member of the Texas legislature. And some of the things that are used in this, which create a very difficult thing for me as a legally trained person to swallow, are some of the comparisons that are made in this. So there is a case that is cited in it, and it is called Skinner versus Oklahoma. And Skinner versus Oklahoma relates to the 1935 Habitual Criminal Sterilization Act. And this was a legislation that was passed by Oklahoma that said that a judge could order the sterilization of, quote, habitual criminals. And this would be either a vasectomy or a salpingectomy. So one of those two things would be able to be on the table. And they are comparing trans-affirming treatment to this legislation and to the case of Skinner versus Oklahoma, where Skinner versus Oklahoma ruled that no, the state cannot habitually sterilize those who are convicted of crimes. And it used the language of eugenics when it was saying that, because it was using wording like, in the wrong hands, this is dangerous. So what Ken Paxton is doing with his comparison here is he is creating a dichotomy where he is saying, on the one hand, we don't allow the eugenics of criminals. But we'll happily allow the eugenics of your children and your future children, which is absolutely disgusting to hear somebody make that comparison, that my existence is the comparison to eugenics. And as somebody who is also of Jewish heritage, to hear eugenics bandied around because certain people with red armbands used to like that in the 1930s and 40s is also very distasteful to hear as well. So I think that Ken Paxton has gone slightly off the deep end here and has gone swimming around and has found some things, as you said, Nate, and as Ben has said, to make himself sound all wonderful. But in the end, he's just talking legal flim-flam, codswallop, and a load of tosh.
It's a total non sequitur. I got that too. And I was just like, what does that have to do with this? Like, you're just creating. I totally agree with what you said. You're just creating this false narrative, and then being like, well, it's got to be this or it's got to be this, and it's like anybody with any sense of nuance or any sense of critical thinking can read that and be like, that those two don't match. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna add something to that because something else that he does along the same lines, where he equates parents consenting to a child receiving gender-affirming care, equating that with Munchausen by proxy, which is a psychological condition where a parent would seek medical attention, sometimes even invasive medical attention, for their child who does not need it. And he's comparing that to a parent, seeking medical care for their kid, which this is different. This is not even close to the same thing, because it's not the parent necessarily seeking the gender-affirming care. It's the child. This is about the child, and the child does need something. This is standard medical care. He could make the same comparison with, you take your child to their primary care doctor for, I don't know, an ear infection, and yes, the parent is going to consent to the child getting medications for that. That doesn't make it not necessary. It's still necessary. It's the same level of necessity with gender-affirming care. It's not someone faking it. So that's just, and legally, that has a whole separate implication legally as well.
So say, when it comes to Munchausen's by proxy is a form of abuse when it is vested onto children, because it is requiring children to be placed in a situation where they may necessarily go through medical procedures which are completely unnecessary. These are not medical procedures that are completely unnecessary. And what I see throughout this very loophole-loving opinion that's been written by Ken Paxton, the loopholes are so large here, you could race the America's Cup through it. And I mean, for goodness sakes, to try to say that being a responsible parent and taking your child to see their primary care physician is the same as taking your child through unnecessary medical procedures is absurd. When in the first case, you're taking them there because you believe you're acting in your child's best interests, because the child has come up with you and said, look, excuse me, I've got a problem. I need some help. Whereas in the second one, you're going, ooh, there's something not quite right. with my child.
You've got a
and
problem.
It's not, and it's not the child saying it; it's the parent
Right.
saying it.
Absolutely. I want to give Jason a chance to weigh in here as well.
Well, I am not a parent. I'm not trans. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any legal training whatsoever. And in a lot of cases, and in fact, this whole episode, I kind of have the face of the enemy, so to speak. But I do like to be an ally when it comes to matters like this. And I look at these, again, as Phoebe said, opinion pieces, and that's really what this is. It's opinion wrapped in legalese. A term I like to use is kind of like a truth laundering. Let's take a tiny little bit of truth, wrap it in a bunch of misinformation and lies, and that's pretty much what we've been seeing for decades and decades and decades. But what I can say is that, obviously I'm against child abuse in all of its forms. And some of that includes some of the accepted child abuses, especially in places like Texas, where Little Miss Beauty pageants are still going strong, where they pretty much, take these girls, they dress them up, they've, fill them full of stimulants to, get them stage ready and all that. And it's not to the benefit of the kid. It's to the benefit of the parents. Pure and simple. It has nothing to do. Oh, my little darling loves it. Like when you have to get your 5-year-old hopped up on Mountain Dew and all that, she probably doesn't actually like it. But we also have other allowable medical procedures. Circumcisions are still huge. I don't want to equate.
Yes,
I don't want to really equate, circumcisions to, what a trans person goes through, because they are not the same. But I will say is that they are completely unnecessary. And by the very definition of what they're trying to push through, they're getting rid of live viable tissue for what? Because Serial Guy way back in the ye olde days was like, I don't want people to masturbate. That's really all it was about. And then throughout the years, it got conflated into, oh, it's a cleanliness issue, or mine looks like that, so my son should look like that. But yeah, as Phoebe said, this is not law. It's not. It's not like an executive order. It's not a legislation that is going through the Texas governing body. It really is just an opinion, but one that can sway judges. And while we have not seen it go through the courts yet, we heard that there is a lawsuit to prevent this, and now there's also a restraining order that Phoebe was so gracious to provide for us in the chat earlier. I'm sure we can get those in the notes as well.
Yeah,
and so this is going to be tested. One thing I'm concerned about is because of how vague it is, and because of how broad some of these definitions are, and because of how this truth is being wrapped in lies, that seeing the governing body down in Texas, seeing the legislative body that's in Texas, I'm concerned that this is not going to go well, as we are constantly seeing. There is an agenda, and they're playing it through and through.
These are dark days. These are dark days. If you are a trans child, trans youth, or a parent, I have seen, and I endorse this, and I hate to say this, but if you are one of those people, it's not a bad idea to start having a safe folder of everything that your child has been doing, all the legal procedures and everything like that. It's horrible to say that. It's like saying, as a Jewish person, I was brought up to have a grab bag ready to go. have an escape route in my car. And it's horrible to think like that. But safe folders are where you have all the legal documents for your child. If you've changed your child's name, all of the medical procedures, if any, that your child has had done, including the routine ones like vaccinations and things like that. And just making sure that you, if there is a knock on your door from Family Protective Services, as is listed in here, that they will start investigating the families of trans kids, you can demonstrate that you have a loving family unit, that you are looking out for the best interests of your child. And here is all of the evidence. And it is horrible to say that, but this is where we are.
Yeah, I had one more thing I want to throw in, and then I'll let Ben wrap up the segment. But I just want to say I didn't find this convincing at all. I read through this, and I was looking at this list of side effects from transition surgery that he lists off, and it goes like, it runs the gamut. It's decreased libido, cancer risk, benign pituitary prolactinoma, whatever that is. Maybe Ben can tell me. But as a layperson, I'm just reading this, and I'm like, okay, I kind of don't buy it, but you've got a lot of footnotes here, so let's just take a look. And so I clicked on this footnote from the it referred to the National LGBTQIA Health Education Center, which upon cursory inspection, it did seem to be legitimate, but it was a dead link. There was nothing there. And so I'm like, well, that's funny. Like, this isn't like old news or anything. This is pretty recent. So why is this going to a dead link? And then I scroll down to the next page, to the next ridiculous claim, and I'm like, well, that seems kind of fishy. Let's actually look at the footnote, and maybe I'll take a read at that. And that was a dead link too. And I'm like, okay, now this is kind of weird. Like, the website is cited 3 times. Each link leads nowhere. And that, to me, super fishy. But the other thing that stuck out in my mind was that even if this sort of treatment does give you higher blood pressure or higher risk of this or that or the other thing, there are innumerable drugs and treatments that have side effects, right? Like, there are if you've ever seen a pharmaceutical commercial in the United States, you know that there are a bunch of side effects that sound pretty fucking scary. But the point is that there's a net benefit to this drug or to this treatment. That's why they're selling it. That's why that's why it passed the checks that we have for these new drugs and whatnot. There's a net benefit here. Everything's got a side effect. Increased blood pressure, I might take that trade-off for, reduced risk of suicide or being uncomfortable and unhappy for the formative years of my teenage life. Like, that seems to me to be a pretty worthy trade-off. But Ben, what is pituitary prolactinoma?
Prolactinomas are some of the most common tumors of the pituitary gland. That's a whole separate show right there about pituitary prolactinomas.
Well, I'm sorry I opened that can of worms, but I was just kind of reading that, and I'm like, I'm not buying it. But go ahead and take us out of this segment.
But yeah, so kind of the big thing that we learned from this article is that, doctors and patients can have these conversations, and they need to be allowed the space to have these conversations. Doctors need to be allowed to give the best standard of care to their patients, and people who have no expertise and no knowledge on the subject should really, stay out of it.
Truer words were never spoke.